Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's had a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragonsjewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan, and I'm just gonna get all that wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way first. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so, just down below. If you like the content you see, don't forget to give a like. And of course, any love, comments, suggestions, all those wonderful things, there's a comment section down there as well for all of that. Today we are diving back into the Ghostly Echoes series. We had been working our way through British Columbia, so now we are going east. We're skipping over Alberta because we already did that one, and we are diving into the ghost stories of Saskatchewan. So I hope you guys enjoy these next few spooky tales. This story takes place in Kinserlee, Saskatchewan. The Mysterious Man in Black. The house was built in the early 60s on a site where no dwelling had ever existed. Yet by 1968, one of the bedrooms had become home to a ghost. It was mysterious even by supernatural standards, the appearance of this man in black. The first to see the apparition was one of the daughters of the family that lived in the home. The girl awakened in the middle of the night when the pet cat she had been sleeping with suddenly bolted out of the room. As she opened her eyes, the cat was soon forgotten, for a complete stranger was poised on the foot of her bed. He was a man dressed all in black, from the tips of his shoes to the brimmed hat that perched on his head. He was staring at her with fixation, but eventually disappeared without a single word or action. The daughter managed to finally get back to sleep. The cat, perhaps showing more sense, never returned. Some months later, the family had a male guest stay overnight in the same bedroom. Early the next morning, one of the sons went to wake the man and advise him that breakfast would soon be ready. The guest paused for a moment before acknowledging the invitation. At the breakfast table, the man asked the boy about the stranger in the doorway. His question was reflected with a blank stare. "The tall man, the fellow who'd been standing beside you when you came to wake me," he added, only to be met with total confused silence from his hosts. He described the stranger as being dressed entirely in black, including a black hat, and he said that the man appeared to have abnormally long arms. The family assured their guests that no one fitting his description was in the house, and the boy remained quite certain that he'd been standing in the bedroom doorway alone. Within a year, there was another sighting of the black-clad man in that bedroom. A woman who was visiting woke one night to see the stranger walking along the side of her bed towards the foot. He paused there a moment, reached out to briefly touch her, then disappeared. The woman left with equal haste and found another place to sleep for the remainder of the night. Later, she described the man as others had, with one exception. He appeared to her without a hat, sporting instead a rather long grey brush cut. Even in the unpredictable world of ghosts, this apparition is a curiosity. There are records of hauntings in relatively new buildings, but usually the spirit can be connected to a previous structure on the same site. In Some Canadian Ghosts, 1973, Sheila Hervey suggests that the man may have once lived in the room and must be a relatively recent entry into the world of ghosts. Her explanation continues that if he were from another period in history, his interest would not likely be confined to that one specific room in the house. Maybe, but then again, maybe not. Could it be that the man in black is not attached to the room, but to something within? There have been various accounts of objects being haunted, particularly antique pieces of furniture. For all we know, the gentleman could have been visiting his former bed frame, or a bookcase that once stood in his own hall. Another possibility is the property itself. A pioneer who had owned and loved the land might be expected to roam more freely. What about a fellow who had, according to the necessities of early rural life, been buried there? It's not inconceivable that an unmarked grave may have occupied the space deep beneath that bedroom. The man's somber clothing certainly would suggest burial dress. Whatever his reasons for existing, the spirit never caused the family any real trouble. They came to accept him as simply an unusual feature in their home, a mystery that to this day remains unsolved. This story takes place in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. 2 families, 1 house. "Mum, Mum!" Wanda Persky was standing at the kitchen sink when she heard the child cry out. "It doesn't even startle me anymore," she thought, as she reached for a dish towel and turned around. Sure enough, through the open crack of a bedroom door, Wanda could see her playing. She was a sweet little girl with her hair swept back in ribbons. The child crouched on the floor in her pretty pink dress, intent on some unseen toy or game. "Mum, Mum!" With a sigh, Wanda turned back to her dishes. It was unsettling, but there was nothing she could do. The child was not her daughter. She was not anyone's daughter in this lifetime. She was a ghost, and experience had taught Wanda that if she tried to approach her or answer her calls, the girl would simply disappear. It had been years since the Persky family first moved into their Silverwood Heights home in Saskatoon, and years since they first met the spirits they were to share it with. The girl in the pink dress was a frequent visitor. So was a grown man with short hair and old-fashioned breeches. They were translucent figures, often appearing silhouetted in front of the windows. The girl could also be seen behind partially closed doors, and her appearances were frequently accompanied by the voice of a child calling its mother. They were unusual tenants, these ghosts, but Wanda and her family had grown accustomed to their presence. For years, it was a harmonious cohabitation. Unfortunately, it was not destined to remain as such. The ghosts who had established themselves as harmless apparitions began to take on a physical quality. At first, it was merely playful. The Persky children would feel someone tap them on the shoulder and turn to find no one there. But as time went on, the spectral touches became increasingly forceful and threatening. When Wanda's children began to be literally pushed around by the spirits, she felt it was time to do something. A Catholic priest was called and persuaded to come by and bless each room of the house. Since then, the supernatural activity has stopped. There have been no more shoves by invisible hands, no more children's voices calling for their mothers, and no more apparitions at the windows or anywhere else. For the first time in nearly a decade, the Perskys have a home to themselves. This story takes place in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, the haunted handprint. In 1974, the Olsen family moved an old farmhouse from Saskatoon to a piece of property they owned in the countryside. They also moved a ghost. When the Olsens purchased the home, they had no idea it was haunted. When they hauled it out of the city, not a single supernatural thing took place. But it wasn't long after they moved in that the senior occupant of the house made himself known. Sandy Olsen was cooking dinner one day while the rest of the family worked in the yard. A sudden, insistent tapping noise made her turn from the stove. Nothing seemed amiss in the kitchen, however, and since Sandy knew she was in the house alone, she assured that she had simply heard the children playing along the outside wall. She turned back to her cooking. Tap, tap, tap. It was definitely an inside sound, that just like someone was hitting the table with a Sandy's thought was arrested mid-sentence as she turned to investigate. In fact, she'd forgot about the tapping altogether when she saw a heavy china platter that had been sitting on a cabinet by the far wall come sailing across the room by itself. It crashed dramatically against the doorframe, sending out 1,000 hand-painted slivers. That was the Olsens' introduction to the phantom they would eventually name Eddie. In all fairness, Eddie did not misrepresent himself in that initial meeting. He was first and foremost a noisy specter. Most of Eddie's appearances involved crashing, banging, or tapping sounds. One evening, the Olsens heard a thundering noise that they could only describe as a bowling ball traveling across the roof of the outside veranda. On one of his quieter nights, Eddie simply materialized into a misty human shape standing by the bathtub, and every visit, quiet or clamorous, was accompanied by what the Olsons politely referred to as the indescribable odor. Although all his appearances were memorable, in 1979, Eddie found a way to truly make his mark. Sandy Olson went downstairs one morning to find a large, wet handprint on the glass pane of a storm window. When she tried to wipe it off, the print remained. Over 15 years, it still remains, a vivid sign that no matter who legally owns the house, Eddie possesses it. This story takes place in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Man in the Mirror. It was truly a beautiful house, but for some reason no one wanted to buy it. For years, Darwin Wagner had admired the historic two-story Tudor-style Saskatoon home. He noticed when it went up for sale, and after it had been on the market for an extremely long time, he thought he'd take a long shot. The couple that owned it just couldn't sell it, Darwin said. So one day I just stopped and I made an offer and they took it. Darwin was amazed at his good fortune. Suddenly he was the proud owner of a gorgeous home with French doors, a huge fireplace, a sunroom, a large foyer, and numerous other fabulous details. The only undesirable feature came to light on the very day that Darwin took possession. I had got the keys from the lawyer, and the movers were bringing my things into the house, recalled Darwin. The first thing they brought in was my Chesterfield. I was sitting on it looking around when I heard my name being whispered. I got up and followed the whisper, and it took me to the back room in the basement, which was the pantry. As soon as I opened the door, it stopped. It was a strange and unnerving welcome for a man who claimed to have never believed in ghosts before that. Darwin didn't know it at the time, but that disbelief was about to evaporate. Over the nearly 8 years he would spend in the house, his skepticism would be replaced with an unshakable conviction that spirits do exist. For Wagner's lovely new home was undeniably haunted. The ghostly activity was witnessed by not only Darwin, but also his friends, relatives, roommates, and a variety of visitors. It was interesting to some, frightening to others, and an inescapable fact of life to the man who unwittingly purchased the house which came with a spectral tenant. It wasn't long before Darwin realized that most of the phenomena seemed to originate from two areas, the pantry and the attic. The spectre was extremely active, however, and ultimately would not go to any part of the house for the sake of attention or a good physical joke. Brisk chills of air would often sweep through the house with such speed and force that they would move the heavy coats that hung on hooks by the door. The floor frequently creaked as though someone was standing there, shifting his weight from one leg to the other. An eerie, semi-transparent image was often glimpsed scurrying about the house, and it was nearly impossible to keep inventory of the items that went missing or were misplaced. Most were personal possessions, but some were practical necessities that the ghost hid in a clear bid to frustrate Darwin. One example was the thermostatic control for the breakfast grill. It had been missing for so long, and Darwin had searched the house so thoroughly for it that he had finally given up hope of ever finding the device. But mysteriously, after an unsuccessful effort to buy a replacement part, he came home to find the controls sitting in plain view on his kitchen counter. Occasionally the spirit's attentions could become physical. I had a room upstairs on the second floor, which was a bedroom, but I turned it into a TV room, said Darwin. And in that room was a door that led to a stairway that led up to the attic. Darwin frequently sensed the ghost presence in that room, lurking behind the bedroom door, which was always left open. On one particular evening, I was sitting on the Chesterfield with my dogs, and I got that creepy feeling on my shoulder that someone was watching me. And you have to understand that at this point, I'm living alone in this big, big house. The feeling was so intense that my hair was standing up. Then all of a sudden, the ghost yanked my hair. It just totally yanked my whole head back, and it took off through the door to the attic. My dogs just ran over to the door and barked and barked and barked. Other experiences were less confrontational, but perhaps even more frightening. There were countless nights when Darwin would awake from a deep sleep to see the shadowy figure of a man standing at his bedroom door. I think that bothered me the most, he said. Imagine when you're half asleep and you wake up and see that standing there. You can't even breathe. You get totally petrified. The ghost did not stop at trying to approach Darwin when he was sleeping either. Before long, it was invading his sleep, appearing in reoccurring dreams. In these dreams, he was able to speak with Darwin and told him a number of things about the house. He showed me the pantry from which the initial whisper came, said Darwin. He showed me that there was a doorway in there, and he told me about a little spot built in with 2x4s up in the attic beside the chimney. That's where he used to put stuff. In the dream conversation, Darwin thought to ask the man why he was so drawn to the house. He said that his family had lived there. Darwin explained that he had left to go away to war. When he came back, his family had moved. According to the ghost, none of the information would be remembered unless Darwin awoke at 5 a.m. and wrote it all down. So I got up at 5 o'clock, said Darwin, and grabbed a big sketch pad, and I let him control my hand. And I still have it here. Pages of what he drew for me. The next day, out of curiosity, Darwin climbed the stairs of the undeveloped attic to see if he could confirm one of the apparition's claims. There, beside the chimney, he discovered an 18-inch storage box built in between the studs. It existed just as the ghost had said, and was exactly where he had said it would be. The dreams provided Darwin with his first clear look at the spirit that was haunting his home. He described him as an unattractive, middle-aged male who was balding and unfashionably dressed in a black trench coat and black rubber boots. The man slouched terribly from a lack of self-esteem. Darwin sensed that his hands were always just hanging at his side. After seeing this unappealing image in his sleep, he was occasionally shocked to see it peering out at him from the mirror of the second-floor bathroom. It was about this time that Darwin Wagner's niece moved in with him, apparently the ghost who had just sort of been putting up with Darwin's living there. Was decidedly displeased at having to deal with another flesh-and-blood person. The spirit seemed most aggravated when the young woman's presence resulted in some renovations to his eternal home. She had been staying up on the second floor in her own bedroom, but she wanted a bit more privacy because she was dating this guy, explained Darwin. Now, there was a big rumpus room in the basement, and I said, well, I'm going to renovate that, and then you'll have your own private bedroom, bathroom, and sort of a living room area. So I did that, but every time we went to paint or change something, this thing would act up like crazy, slam doors on us, hide things on us, and it didn't like her boyfriend ever spending the night. Every time that would happen, they would just get into the bedroom and the door would just slam. Darwin's niece was the first, but not last, of the roommates that would spend time in the haunted house. Every one of them had numerous experiences with the ghost, the most common being missing belongings. This one guy began losing his clothes, recalled Darwin. He'd be, I'm missing sweatpants, and I'm missing jeans, and I'm missing this, and I'm missing that. Every roommate had similar complaints. According to Darwin, that's when the specter's activity became the most frustrating, because he felt that he was being blamed for it. It's like they were accusing me of taking the stuff, he said. There was one renter who witnessed something much more extraordinary than missing belongings. We were down in the basement rumpus room, and we could hear these footsteps coming down the stairs, recalled Darwin. And he got really alarmed, because I hadn't told him about this ghost. And all of a sudden, you could see the image of the shoulders and the back of the head, and I said, oh, look at this. Let's chase him. So I jumped up and ran towards the stairway, and it took off up the stairs. Now, in the kitchen, the cupboards were the sort of old-fashioned cabinets that went from floor to ceiling, and as the ghost rushed through the room, every door on every cupboard flew open and shut as it went past. Then we ran through the dining room, living room, up the stairs to the second floor, and into the attic. There the ghost managed either to hide or escape. There was no further sight of him. Various people had various reactions to the spirit, including those who may have qualified as experts in the field. 2 pastors from Texas who had performed a marriage ceremony for Darwin's niece wanted to exorcise the house. A United Church minister who attended a birthday party in the house felt that would have been a mistake. He believed that there was not one, but many spirits, said Darwin, who had on occasion seen the apparition of a little girl who was supposed to be the other ghost's sister. He suggested that they can be playful, even if they're annoying at times, and become a positive thing in life. That particular minister was quite alone in his opinion. A priest that Darwin spoke to following a particularly disturbing period of paranormal activity told him never to return to the house. The spirit's evil. It could harm you in many ways, the priest said. The man's word frightened Darwin, but he felt that he had no choice but to return to the house. After all, he owned it, and it was his only home. Looking for other professional input, Darwin once spoke to a psychic about the strange things that occurred in his home. The man offered for $250 to spend 2 nights in the basement bedroom, and provided Darwin with an analysis of the situation. Unfortunately, he only lasted 2 or 3 hours. He came up totally shaken, said Darwin. He said, "I've got to get out of this house. I'm leaving. You don't owe me anything." On his way out the door, though, he did manage to tell Darwin that he had seen 2 shades of amber floating in the house. That, he said, strongly indicated an evil spirit. Was the ghost truly dangerous? Ultimately, Darwin felt that it was not. This thing was mostly a practical joker, he said, as long as we weren't touching anything or making renovation-like changes. But he did admit that sometimes the accumulation of harmless disruptions could really get to him. One such day, Darwin was in the basement, ironing a shirt and getting ready to go to work. "I had a big church organ upstairs," he said. There was no one else in the house, but suddenly the organ was playing the first 2 bars of the bridal chorus. Now my lawyer had a key to the house, and I had a friend who had a key to the house. So I yelled up to the top of the stairs, calling out their names. No one answered, and all the lights were out on the main floor. So I went upstairs, went into the living room, and the organ light was on. And that was the day I really lost it, because the ghost had been playing so many little tricks on me that I had just had it. So I went up to the second floor, and I just screamed at this thing to come out, to confront me, and tell me who it was. When Darwin received no reply, he simply finished dressing and went to work. He found that leaving the house that evening was easier than returning, however. I waited, I think, until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, he said, and when I did pull up to the front of my house, I could see that my drapes were pulled open and someone was standing in the front window looking at me. Despite his impulse to leave, Darwin went inside, built a roaring fire, and even sat down at the organ to play a few hymns. I knew that if I didn't play it then, I'd never play it again, he remembered. The remainder of the night was uneventful. In 1993, Darwin sold the house. Once again, it sat on the market for quite a long time. During that period, the real estate agent scheduled an open house. One woman who attended the event admitted that she wasn't interested in buying, but was interested in looking around because she had lived there a long time ago when the house was used as a nursing residence. Eventually she said to Darwin, "I have to tell you a story. There used to be, up in the second floor bathroom, a mirror in the shape of Saskatchewan over the sink," the woman said. Darwin told her that the unusual glass was still there, and the woman continued, "Well, every time the girls would go into the bathroom, this bald-headed guy dressed in black would be looking at us from that mirror." Darwin immediately went to get his sketches of the ghost. When the woman looked at them, she didn't hesitate. "That's him," she said. "Same guy." Eventually the house did sell, and Darwin invited a crowd of his friends over for one final party. There were probably 20 of us sitting around in the living room, he explained, and I was telling them the story about the ghost, and my dreams, and the drawings that I made of the secret doorway in the pantry. And all the big macho guys are going, "Oh, you're so full of shit." I told them, "This is what happened. All I can do is tell you." The disbelievers asked permission to go down the pantry and look around. Darwin told them to go ahead. So they went down to the room, and they searched, and they searched, and they searched. And about half an hour later, they came up and their faces were white, he recalled. The men were asking for a pickaxe. They told Darwin that they had moved one set of shelving out of the pantry and had discovered a cemented doorway. "The house was already sold, though," said Darwin, "so I couldn't allow them to do any damage to it." Nevertheless, one more of the spirit stories had been confirmed. Darwin Wagner had felt that disclosing his knowledge about the ghost to the prospective buyers was the decent thing to do. Fortunately, the information did no damage to the deal. Later on, Darwin's honesty at the time of the sale even afforded him one small luxury. When he became curious about whether or not the ghost continued to be active, he had no qualms about calling to ask. The new owners answered. The spectre remained very active, particularly in the basement. It would appear that the balding man in black had no intention of leaving his haunt. As for Darwin Wagner, he's just pleased that his current home seems to have no supernatural features whatsoever. This story takes place in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, a 2-story spook. There is a large house on Saskatoon Lansdowne Avenue that was long ago divided into apartments, and in the early 1970s, Gary Stockwell lived in the one-bedroom unit upstairs. It was a nearly perfect place for him, spacious, inexpensive, and comfortable. On the downside, it was particularly quiet. On a regular basis, Gary was bothered by the heavy sounds of doors opening and slamming shut in the apartment below. It was a strange thing, since he knew the apartment was sitting vacant. Even more confusing was the frequent stomping of boots coming up the stairs towards his door. When Gary would walk out to the staircase to see who was visiting him, the noise would stop immediately. No one was ever there, and it wasn't long before Gary became to accept that he was living in a haunted house. It was a bit of a relief when a married couple moved into the noisy suite downstairs. Gary thought that listening to the natural sounds of his neighbors would be a comforting change, and hoped that the additional human tenants would help squelch whatever other presence occupied the house. His hope was in vain. If anything, the supernatural activity seemed to increase and became more violent in nature. On one occasion, Gary was reading quietly in his bedroom when 3 electrical wall outlets in the room shorted out and exploded simultaneously. "That's just old wiring in an old house," a skeptical friend said later, when Gary spoke of the incident. "Really," mused Gary, "even though there was nothing plugged in the sockets." Late one Sunday evening, Gary had just come through the main door of the house before he climbed the stairs to his apartment. He was stopped by the couple who lived directly below him. They were angry at his inconsideration, complaining about Gary banging loudly on their ceiling for the past 2 days. "But it couldn't have been me," said Gary, holding up a small suitcase by way of explanation. "I went to Regina for the weekend." The husband and wife went pale at this. They'd apparently had other experiences which could not be rationally explained. Within 2 weeks, they had moved out. Gary was hesitant to follow them. After all, this apartment suited his needs in so many ways. It was late one night while in bed that he made his final decision. "I'm definitely leaving," he thought, "first thing in the morning, if not sooner. Even if I don't have a place to stay, I'm gone." Of course, Gary may have been influenced by the events of the moment. He came to this firm decision when his bedroom doors suddenly and unexplainably began opening and slamming shut. Believing he'd rather not wait to see what was next on the haunting agenda, Gary Stockwell left the house on Lansdowne Avenue the very next day. This story takes place in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Wanted, one resident ghost. I am ashamed to say that a city the size of Prince Albert is surprisingly void of ghosts, Ron Smith wrote in September of 1994. If for no other reason than it used to be a provincial hanging centre, it should be entitled to its fair share of haunts. Determined to have that to which he feels entitled, Smith does his best to ignite spooky rumors about the museum. He speaks of phantom howling sounds in the towers when the temperature dips particularly low, and of mysteriously rattling dishes and singing in the pipes. He'll soberly tell anyone he gets chills when the museum closes for the season and empties itself of comforting human company. He even goes so far as to conjecture that his supposed spirits are friendly ghosts who seem to get excited when we talk. But it's all for naught. According to Smith, all his wishful thinking and conjuring is regularly deflated by co-workers he refused to as the zealous ghostbusters. As fast as I try to activate them, my buddies do them in, he laments, citing one particular instant when Smith was able to convince a newspaper reporter to do a story on the museum's spirits, only to have one of the ghostbusters capture half of the article for himself, and his maddeningly logical explanations. Not one to give up, Ron Smith promises that the Prince Albert Historical Museum would be a haven for ghosts, should one choose to haunt it. There are numerous relics and artifacts to cling to, and plenty of interesting history to enact in this former fire hall. Smith longs to have something lurking in his museum's tower. Surely there's a ghost out there who longs for a home. Put them together and it would be a match made in heaven or some other blissful nearly dimension. This story takes place in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. The Mysterious Mirror. It was one of those cozy-looking family houses built on Taylor Street in Saskatoon, back in the 40s. Its wartime style qualified it as a character home, and Janice Wynne was smitten enough to lay down a damage deposit. There is a beautiful archway leading into the kitchen, Janice told her children, and big windows to let in the sun. Best of all, in the small living room that was characteristic of homes of that era, there was a decorative mirrored wall. The reflection gave the illusion of openness, creating an inviting space that Janice was sure her family would enjoy. Furniture was moved in and meticulously arranged. Pots and pans found new places in new cupboards, and clothing was hung in dark, empty closets. Within 2 hectic days, the Wynne family had settled in comfortably. But the comfort was not to last. In their old home, the living room had been the social center for Janice and her children. It was where they watched television, worked on school assignments, read magazines, and simply talked to one another. Now, although the family camaraderie seemed to be intact, no one stayed in the living room long enough to allow the whole group to gather. Janice would walk into the room and sit down, and only moments later someone would leave. Within a short time, Janice herself would feel restless and uncomfortably self-conscious, and would move to another room. This unusual rotation would continue for hours, with no one in the family really understanding why they felt so uneasy in the mirrored room. One day, Janice's young daughter expressed what everyone had been feeling. The little girl had just barely settled down at the coffee table with her coloring books and crayons when she began gathering them up in frustration. "I hate this place," she cried as she stomped off to the kitchen. "It always feels like when Holly's staring at me." As a mother, Janice had stopped 100 fights that began with the timeless phrase, "So-and-so is staring at me." But on this occasion, the words hit home. That was the feeling. Someone was staring at them when they sat in the living room. Nervously, slowly, Janice turned to the mirror wall. She wasn't sure what she expected to see. but needing nothing more than her own terrified gaze made her feel ridiculous. "Oh, something in the mirror is watching us," she mocked herself. "How foolish." Still, she could never shake the uncomfortable feeling that crept into her in that room. Although they had now been there for a few months, Janice stubbornly decided the family was still adjusting to the move. After all, the baby, just 18 months old, had been out of sorts for ages. Janice thought that moving his crib into her bedroom might soothe him, but the effect seemed to be the opposite. Day and night, if the child slept in that room, he woke up screaming or frantically babbling. When he slept in another room, the frightening behavior stopped. Eventually, Janice learned why. As she was rolling over in bed one night, Janice woke herself up enough to sense that she was not alone in the bedroom. Thinking that one of her children had come looking for her, she fought back sleep and opened her eyes. It was then she saw her, the vaporous white form of a woman moving towards the bed. Even more alarmingly, this apparition looked wildly angry, and in a malevolent gesture stretched her hands out towards Janice's throat, and then she was gone. It rarely takes more than that to make someone feel unwelcome, and predictably, Janice began an immediate search for a new home. Happily, she found one. Today, the Wim family is enjoying life in a cheerful house where nothing upsets the children, no fearsome specters appear in the night, and a person can spend hours in the living room without sensing that someone somewhere is watching. It sounds infinitely more cozy than the strange house of mirrors on Taylor Street. This story takes place in Yorkton, Saskatchewan. The Yorkton child. She's just a little girl, 4 years old at the most, and people who see her for the first time are usually concerned that she's been left unattended. When they approach in order to question her, however, she disappears into thin air. That is the child of the Crossroads, a spirit that's haunted Yorkton for decades. This sporadic visitor never ages and never does more than wander along the side of the road by herself. The locals have no explanation for the little girl's appearance, but one woman I spoke to suggested that she may be a visitor from the city's nearby cemetery. Chances are it'll never be known why this child continues to materialize at the Crossroads. This story takes place in Battleford, Saskatchewan, a phantom at the fort. As far as we know, George wasn't even here during the siege in 1885, the woman explained. He came out west a few years later. George was, according to our guide, a dental surgeon who had been posted at the fort in the late 1800s. Although he was fortunate enough to have missed the violence of the rebellion, the man must have been tortured by terrible personal problems. Shortly after the turn of the century, George put a gun to his head and ended his life in an upstairs room of the officers' quarters. If George was seeking escape from his dreary life at Fort Battleford, however, he may not have succeeded. There are several people who believes he is still there. It was very strange, the woman said. There were always folks who would walk into the officers' quarters, then turn around and walk straight back out. It seems that some people became highly uncomfortable in the building. Many would express having sensed the presence of another when they were there alone. Our guide admitted that despite many reports of the resident ghost, she devoted very little thought to George. Perhaps that explains why he singled her out for special attention. One morning I walked into the building to prepare for the day, and quite a bit of furniture had been overturned. The woman knew that no one had been in earlier than she, and that everything had been orderly when she locked up the night before. Being of a practical nature, she simply reorganized the room and set about her day's work. On another occasion, the woman opened the officers' quarters in the morning to find playing cards arranged in bizarre patterns on the floor. The cards were a prop set on a table to add some color to the surroundings. George seemed to feel that they were interesting when laid out on the creaky floor. I asked our guide if all these events had invested her with a belief in the supernatural. She responded with a broad smile. "Oh, I've always believed in ghosts," she said, and went on to explain that early each morning she is wakened by the spirit of her dead grandmother, a woman who obviously disliked laziness. "It's not at all frightening, but I can never sleep in," she laughingly complained. She should count her blessings. Most people dealing with one ghost at work and another at home would have trouble getting any sleep at all.